Hello, and thank you for joining us today to learn more about the FAA's modifications to the Chicago Midway International Airport Class C airspace. My name is Cherie Obert, and I am the Air Traffic Manager of Chicago Midway Air Traffic Control Tower. Today, I am joined by Stephen Phillips, North Team Manager, Airspace and Procedures for the FAA Central Service Area, Al Quagliardi, Support Manager for Airspace Procedures at Chicago Approach. Also on our panel, we have two members of the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, Josh Stritzfield, a representative from Chicago Approach, and Roy Guerrero, our principal facility representative here at Chicago Midway. The Class C changes go into effect Thursday, June 15th. Today, we're going to explain them to you and provide the background on how we got here. Our goal is to answer your questions on the Class C changes. You may submit your questions on Class C changes on our live YouTube chat. This presentation, like others before it, is being recorded and will be available on the FAA's YouTube channel. So first, we want to show you a short PowerPoint on what is changing in our airspace, and Al Quagliardi will start us off. Take it away, Al.
Thanks, Cherie. Hi, I'm Al Quagliardi, Airspace and Procedures Manager at Chicago TRACON. Welcome to the informational meeting to discuss the upcoming Midway Class C airspace modifications due to take effect on June 15th. This modification has been several years in the making and will increase the margin of safety between aircraft landing at Midway International Airport and VFR aircraft transiting the Lake Michigan shoreline. Questions will be accepted via the YouTube platform. If you have any questions during this presentation, please enter them in the comments section and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Prior to the development of RMP, RNF GPS approaches at Midway, there were no approaches designed for runway 22 left. This required aircraft to fly approaches to runway 31 center and then circle to land on runway 22 left when weather conditions required it to be the designated arrival runway. The implementation of advanced navigation approaches at Midway changed the flight paths of aircraft landing on runway 22 left to a much more efficient model, but created the opportunity for conflicts between between aircraft flying the approaches and VFR aircraft along the Lake Michigan shoreline. The need to increase the margin of safety in this area resulted in the airspace modification. Midway Class C airspace has existed as depicted in this slide for many years. As you can see, none of the airspace is over the water. The absence of controlled airspace on the shoreline allowed aircraft flying in this area to operate at any altitude they liked without speaking to ATC, which would have been able to advise them of any aircraft on the approach to runway 22 left. Over the years, this resulted in a number of incidents requiring ATC intervention, and those incidents prompted action to modify this airspace to prevent further occurrences. The peak boundary depicts the new Class C shelf. The vertical limits will begin at 1,900 feet mean sea level and continue upwards to the bottom of the O'Hare Class B airspace at 3,600 feet. In the parts of the shelf over the water, the base of the airspace will begin at 2,300 feet. As you can see, the northern boundary of the shelf lies just north of I-290, allowing sightseeing aircraft to fly the north of the highway as they typically do now. The addition of the shelf will allow ATC to provide positive separation between IFR and VFR aircraft in an area north and south along the lakefront, while only creating minimal impact for sightseeing aircraft. Aircraft operating over water beneath the shelf will have to fly below 2,300 feet or contact ATC if they wish to fly higher or at a higher altitude. IFR aircraft landing at Midway are descending across the fixed Dixon on the shoreline at 3,000 feet, providing a minimum of 700 feet separation between VFR aircraft flying below the shelf. Aircraft transiting the shoreline must establish two-way radio communications with C90 on 133.9 prior to entering the Class C airspace. This airspace change has no effect on Chicago's Class B airspace. Aircraft outside of O'Hare Class B airspace, but within 30 nautical miles of O'Hare will still be required to have an operating powered-on transponder. Now we'll move on to the legally mandated process to modify this airspace. More on that, I'd like to introduce Stephen Phillips, Airspace Procedures North Team Manager for the Central Service Center's Operational Support Group located in Fort Worth, Texas. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you, Al, and thank you all for joining us this morning. The creation or modification of Class C airspace is what is known as a rulemaking action, meaning the process is subject to numerous FAA and other federal agency regulations which dictate each step of the process. These steps require public involvement in the development of the airspace proposal, opportunities for public input after the proposal is complete, and informational meetings like this one to advertise the effects the airspace will have on pilots flying in the area. The first step in this modification process was the creation of a staff study. Aside from describing the safety issue and its background, this study had to explore all alternatives which might mitigate the issues requiring the modification and provide information on why each alternative was insufficient. Finally, the study had to propose an airspace design. An ad hoc committee comprised of local aviation stakeholders was formed in 2021. FAA employees attended the meetings but did not have voting privileges and were only involved as subject matter experts. The committee reviewed the staff study and its recommendations and presented the FAA with a Class C design recommendation modified from the one in the staff study. The FAA then held informal airspace meetings to publicize the proposal and to obtain additional information. These very well attended virtual meetings, advertised via the FAA's safety team, which you may know as FAST, and FAA social media outlets, were held in September 2021. There was a 30-day waiting period after the second meeting to receive public comments. Several comments and questions were received, but none asked for or warranted changes in the proposed design of the airspace. Links to videos of these two meetings can be found on the email you received from FAST. The FAA then developed a notice of proposed rulemaking, which was published in the Federal Register on October 26, 2022. A 60-day comment period followed, but once again, no comments requesting changes to the airspace were received. The amendment to Midway's Class C airspace was published in the Federal Register on March 3rd with an effective date of June the 15th. The FAA is also required to conduct user education meetings to publicize the implementation of Class C airspace to as many pilots as possible. That's what this meeting is. The decision-making forums have already taken place, and this meeting is intended to publicize the change in airspace so pilots can understand how the change will affect them and ask questions if necessary prior to its effective date. A letter to airmen has also been issued to publicize the change. Follow-up meetings after the effective date of the change are also required. These meetings will be announced after ATC has had sufficient time to evaluate the operations in and around the airspace. As you can see, an enormous amount of effort went into this airspace modification from the time the need for it was recognized until now. Public involvement and input during the entire process was both solicited and welcomed, and the final version of the airspace is better as a result. Now back to Cherie.
Thank you, Steve. So what we will do is start. We actually had some questions that we received from a previous briefing we did yesterday, and then we'll wait for live questions to pop up in the chat as well. So we have a question that came up, and it's as follows. As a general aviation user, can I still fly along the Lake Michigan City as Chicago coast? Short answer is yes. To expand on that, the shelf will not impact you at all at altitudes below 2,300 feet, but you may need to alter your flight path slightly to the east or descend slightly to avoid the shelf if you prefer not to communicate with ATC, or if ATC is unable to let you transit the airspace due to inbound aircraft to Midway. Anyone else on the panel want to chip in on that? Okay. On to the next one. How will this airspace change impact general aviation users of the airspace? How about Josh?
Yeah, I see the impact as being fairly minimal. General aviation seems to have gotten used to the idea of this approach, having been there already. So a lot of people will call us and we'll tell them, what altitude they can safely transit the airspace when we're on 22 left and Midway. But for the most part, the incidents of kind of impacting, the incidents of conflicting with the inbound traffic to Midway have kind of gone down a little bit, but this just kind of solidifies that. It gives everybody a good starting point, so they can safely transit shoreline and not have to, if they're not talking to air traffic, as long as they remain outside of the Charlie, they won't impact or be impacted by the traffic coming in at 22 left.
Thank you, Josh. Anybody else want to chip in on that one? Okay, moving on to the next. A user stated, I fly air tours of the city. Will I have to establish communications for Class C airspace at Midway? So I'm going to toss this one to Josh and or Roy.
Yeah, there should be no requirement for you to contact us as long as you stay below 1,900 feet MSL. There should be no change in procedures at all, really. As long as you're above 290 outside of O'Hara's Class Bravo, there's no requirement for you to talk to ATC for VFR. If you want to come within the Class Charlie, then you have to establish two-way radio communication.
Thank you, Roy. And moving on to the next. Now, this is a little bit of a summary, but this question did come up. Why is the FAA going to all this effort to create this shelf? What problem is it trying to fix? Al, you want to tackle that one for us?
Well, the shelf is being expanded to provide some segregation between the aircraft, the IVA aircraft that are landing on runway 22 left via the RNP or the RNF GPS approaches. When the Regional C was designed, it contained the other approaches at Midway. And then when 22 left was implemented, it wasn't expanded to contain that as well. So after a number of years and quite a bit of safety data of conflicts between IFR arrivals or arrivals into 22 left and aircraft transiting on the Lake Michigan shoreline, we had taken a few steps, issuing a letter to airmen, and then we had also modified a VFR flyway chart that was out there. But none of that thing regulatory, the conflict still existed. So we put together a staff study and several options to modify the C. And the final one came through the ad hoc meetings that were conducted. And it was actually somebody outside of the FAA that had suggested that we modify that portion over the lake 2,300 feet to allow people to go up and down, and they could stay below it if they didn't want to talk to ATC, or they could call for advisories. But anyway, so we expanded the C to include that airspace. We used 290 as a prominent VFR point that people could see. And, I think it's going to add a level of safety that we've needed for several years.
Thank you, Al. Moving on to the next question. So how will this improve safety? And I'll toss this one to Josh.
Like Al said, the original Charlie with the two main approaches in the Midway being the ILS, the 48 and 31 center, it always protected for those. But then with the more advanced RNAV coming out, with the actual approach to 22 left, which did improve safety for the airlines quite a bit, the circling approach put in a lot of unnecessary risk. But now the Charlie needed to be expanded in order to protect for the new approach. So while people, the general aviation public seems to have kind of gotten used to the approach being there and transition to shoreline fairly safely these days. The Charlie just kind of solidifies that idea and makes it known, more well known what you can transition the shoreline at, and not have to worry about being in confliction with the traffic into Midway.
Thank you, Josh. And the next question, will these changes allow for more or less flights in and out of Midway? And this change will have absolutely no effect on the number of aircraft arriving or departing from Midway. So I took that one. So I'll move on to the next question. Did the FAA work with GA groups like the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, AOPA, to make these changes? So I will send this one over Steve's way.
Thanks, Rhea. Yes, I'm happy to. Yes, the ad hoc committee was comprised of nothing but general aviation and carrier aviation stakeholders. Southwest Airlines was present. The Chicago Area Business Aviation Association was there. Matter of fact, one of the officers of that organization was the chairperson of the ad hoc committee. Had multiple nearby airport managers attend, air tour operators. So it was very well populated. I'm going to say there are probably 15 or 20 members of this committee, all of whom were in the aviation community there in Chicago. So they were fully represented. AOPA was there and was an active participant. So for your private pilots out there, your best interests were being looked after.
Thank you, Steve. Got another question here. The sectional chart shows a flyway along the coastline that appears to restrict VFR aircraft to 2,500 feet until the Navy Pier and then 2,000 feet south of that. Why doesn't this solve the issue? I'll send this over to Josh.
Yeah, the flyway that's published on the chart there is more of a suggestion. It's not really a restriction. It's not a requirement. So people aren't required to follow that. Some people may not even notice it or look at it for that matter. So this just sort of takes over from there. Less of a suggestion and more of a restricted airspace to kind of make things safer along shoreline.
Thank you, Josh. Any other panelists want to chime in on that? Okie doke, I will move on. How has the FAA made changes like this at other airports? Steve might know about that one.
Yes, it might. The FAA is required to conduct biennial airspace reviews of all Class B, C, and D airspace volumes. My office in particular here in Fort Worth handles those activities. If any of those reviews indicate that changes need to be made to the existing airspace and the local air traffic facilities request it, then the FAA can propose changes to the airspace. And it doesn't happen often, but changes such as this one have been made in recent years at airports around the country. This particular one didn't come as a result of the biennial review. It came as the result of an identified safety issue that Alan, Josh, and Roy have already spoken to. But it followed the same process as one that would have been identified during a biennial review. So processes were followed, and I think we're going to be in pretty good shape come June the 15th.
Thank you, Steve. And moving along, any changes to frequency VFR pilots should monitor along the lakeshore route? I will toss this to Josh.
Yeah, sorry. The frequencies there's nothing new frequency wise that the Charlie is going to implement. I will point out though that the Chicago approach frequency in that area did change within the last couple of months. It used to be 127.87 and is now 133.9. That should be on all the charts and then updated long before this gets updated on the charts as well. So but Midway's frequency, our frequency, just whatever you would normally call us with for a flight following up and down the shoreline, that's the frequency that you would use to talk to us about this.
Thank you, Josh. And the next question is actually for, I'm going to toss it to both Josh and Roy. For flight following along the shoreline, should we contact Midway Tower or Chicago Approach? And the person that submitted the question said that they've done both.
Roy, I'll go and take this one again. It's just that if you're just transiting the shoreline, there's really no reason to call Midway. Chicago Approach will handle flight following for transiting shoreline traffic. It's for us to tag somebody up for flight following and then have them talk to Midway Tower and then us. It's more trouble for everyone to make frequency changes, things like that. So we'll be controlling everything outside of the shoreline and through the Charlie airspace itself in the shelf. And if you're going to be closer to the surface area, on the other hand, Midway, you'll talk to Midway as long as you're overland and getting close to the Midway surface area. But for the most part, transit the shoreline, just call Chicago Approach. We'll handle flight following up and down the shore there.
Hey, Josh and Roy, do you want to tag on anything on that, or do you cover it all for you?
No, yeah, Josh pretty much covered it. It's more advantageous to have, the aircraft call up Chicago Approach instead of playing frequency tag back and forth and adding workload all around the whole, system. So, yeah, like Josh said, up and on the lakeshore, you'll just call Chicago Approach, and I think it'll be 133.9 most of the time.
Thank you, Roy. Okay, we have another question that came up here. Just to be clear, if pilots are flying the flyway, staying below 2,000 feet and just off the shoreline, you, i.e. Chicago Approach, do not want us to contact you.
Yeah, so like I said before, I don't want to say I don't want you to call. I absolutely, if you want flight following, you should call us. I don't want to scare anyone from calling us for flight following up and down the shoreline. If it's something that you would normally do, you call us for flight following. Absolutely, do not worry about that. However, if you're comfortable just flying up and down the shoreline, remaining outside the Charlie, below the shelf, or outside the shelf, by all means, you don't need to call us. So again, I want to stress, it's not that we don't want you to call us, it's just that you don't need to call us.
Thank you, Josh. And I have one more here so far. It is, what effect would this change on Part 107 operations regarding drones, remote piloting of drones? I'm going to toss this one to Steve.
Thanks, Sheree. Essentially, it will have no effect. The drone operations are handled by a different team in my office, but I've learned a little bit about it. The operations over people rule became effective in 2021. Drone pilots operating under Part 107 may fly at night over people of moving vehicles without a waiver, as long as they meet the requirements defined in the rule. Airspace authorizations are still required for night ops in control airspace under 400 feet. And if you want or need any more information on that, just visit our FAA website at faa.gov.
Thank you, Steve. So we've run out of questions for now. So we're going to do a little bit of a final call. We're not seeing anything being submitted. So that being said, I'm going to go ahead with our closeout. So I and our panelists today, thank you for joining us. A recording of this session will be available on the FAA's YouTube channel shortly. And you may also view recordings from our September 2021 meetings, sorry about that, on the design starting, so the Midway Class C redesign. So when we were actually working through it. So with that, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will say goodbye.